Jamey, 30 seconds on Lamb.
Dak hopefully back at 100% and plays the entire season. You saw what that was for the back end of the 2023 season. You mentioned what he was on pace for in 2024 before Dak suffered the hamstring injury and missed half the year. The addition of George Pickens is probably the best running mate that he's had since, I guess, Amari Cooper, maybe? I don't remember who the other guy was when Lamb started his tenure with Dallas. But clearly since he's had this breakout, year plus, this is definitely the best running mate that he's had. Although Brandon Cooks did have 7 or 8 touchdowns in 2023. So Pickens can certainly score a bunch and still not impact CeeDee Lamb in a way that it's a tremendous negative. So again, Lamb could easily be the number 2 wide receiver off the board. He could easily be the number 3 overall pick off the board, depending on how you view Bijan or Barkley, whoever those guys. But I think he's a top 5 overall pick and should be a top 4 overall selection. Factoring in Bijan with the other 2 receivers.
Okay. Yeah. If you want to show Thomas, it's one of the things that it's held Lamb back a little bit. And that's funny saying that because he finished as number 1 wide receiver in 2023. Is that Dak Prescott's missed 14 games over the last 3 years. But here are the fantasy points per game for CeeDee Lamb with a healthy Dak Prescott. So that is removing week 5 in 2020 when Dak left with an injury. It's removing week 9 last year when Dak left with an injury. You can see the sample sizes on the bottom. But over the last 3 years, it's 18.3 points per game, 23.8, and 19.2. And I would look at that 18.3. He had a horrible week 1. Prescott missed the next, I want to say, 6 games. And then after that week 1, like the last 11 games of the year, Lamb averaged 19.4 or 19.6 fantasy points per game. So I could make a pretty easy case that his floor is 19 PPR fantasy points per game, which is really good. However, all of this is before George Pickens, right? So that needs to be mentioned here. It doesn't seem like any of you are all that bothered by it.
It's hard for me with Pickens. Like, I think he's really good at what he does and could really help Dak out. But he's, first off, not played with anybody like CeeDee Lamb. And he's still never been a really consistent high target earner. I just don't think George Pickens is the type of the guy that goes out on the field and all of a sudden you start throwing the ball to him instead of Lamb. Pickens is the guy you take advantage of the matchup downfield when it's there. And maybe he gets 6 targets a game. And they were throwing those 6 targets a game to a couple other guys that weren't as good as George Pickens. But I don't think George Pickens is the type of guy that you worry about infringing on an alpha number 1's target share.
Okay. Let's move on to
and it's just, in looking at it, like, is Pickens any better or worse than Jordan Addison? Is Pickens any better or worse than T. Higgins? Like, all these guys have another player.
Yeah, but I think CeeDee Lamb, I would say CeeDee Lamb is a great player. He's not as good as Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase.
That is fair. And again, Higgins is obviously better than Pickens, and I would say Addison as a talent is probably better than Pickens. But you get the point. Like, there's somebody else that these guys have to share with. And then, again, the sliding scale of, okay, is Puka's situation better than Lamb's situation?
I keep making I'm sorry. I keep making the case about Jefferson, though, just to your point. Nobody seems to factor it in. I feel like he had his targets were down last year. And his target per route run rate was down. And it was only half the year did TJ Hawkinson play. So,
and yet he was still an amazing fantasy.
He was amazing, but
I think
number 2.
And this is where we're telling you publicly, as we always do, how we feel about this. This is when you're making your draft, what decision you have to make in regards to, okay, do I buy into Dak, Lamb, Pickens as a negative, Dak's injury history as negative, Dak coming off an injury as negative, versus Jefferson, what he's done, the guys he shares the field with, and Addison and Hawkinson, and an unproven quarterback. Like, there's huge questions. There's huge questions, and this may be why you pivot to Bijan at 2 if Chase goes 1, or Barkley still there, or Gibbs still there, or what I would do, and we had this discussion, like, okay, you build out your first couple rounds, and this is where ADP comes in because you can't clearly predict it entirely. But okay, if I do this, with the receiver in round 1, and as Dave said, there's 9. You know, I'd probably say 10 if for me at least, Drake London. But like there's those guys like these guys I want to get one of them, but if I don't, okay, that round 3 receiver range starts to get a little questionable, especially if you're, you know, like 27, 28, 29. You know, Rice is now gone. Higgins is gone. You know, JSN is, you know, starts to get where the tipping point is for me at least. You know, like I would want to guarantee myself the opportunity to take a Jefferson or a Lamb, you know, maybe more so just again, if you're building out with those running backs that are going to be there versus the receivers.
And I should probably say I do, like I maybe I already said it, but I have Lamb a point ahead of Jefferson. So
You did.
like I do think Lamb should be ahead of Jefferson.